Welcome to the 2-Month Review, the weekly podcast brought to you by Open Letter and 3%, in which we take one long, difficult book, break it down into a series of sections, read it bit by bit, chunk by chunk, talking about it, making it exciting, making it interesting, giving you a reason to continue powering through these difficult works of world literature. And for this season, the 6th season, we are reading The Book of Disquiet by Fernando Pessoa, considered to be one of the 20th century's great works of literature. And I am, as always, Chad Post. I am joined by Brian Wood.
Hello, Chad. I'm a little tired today, but I'm waking up and I'm feeling great.
I was up till 2-something watching the baseball game last night.
I believe it.
You're 5 hours and 15 minutes, but it was exciting. It was very exciting.
I watch a real sport called NBA, and it started last night. And I keep telling myself I'm not going to waste another. I watch every single game, every Warriors game, and they're on the West Coast, so it's always late. But I did it again. I don't know why.
It's never going to end. Never going to end. And we will stay tuned at the end for a special announcement about a new game that we're going to be starting with 2-Month Review that both of those comments tied into. And we are joined this week by a special guest who goes by both Jeronimo and Jeronimo, depending on if you pronounce his name in Spanish or in Portuguese, Pizarro, and he is the author of the editor's note to the edition, the New Directions edition, and is also responsible for the organization and publication of this book. So welcome to the podcast.
Hello. I'm also waking up, but in Bogota.
Oh.
So I'm very happy to join you.
Where it's probably a lot nicer than it is here in Rochester.
A little.
What? How far behind New York City is Bogota?
Well, here is 9 o'clock, so it's only 1 hour.
Okay, not too bad.
That's not too bad. So why don't you tell us a bit about yourself? Like, how did you come to this project? What is your background? What is your relationship to Pessoa?
Oh, well, I studied in Portugal for 11 years. I studied and worked. I was there from 2000 to 2011, and I was working in Pessoa's archives since 2003. I've been working with the archives maybe for 15 years.
Oh, wow.
And at a certain point after my graduation, the PhD, I began to study all of the manuscripts of the Book of Disquiet, and to reread every manuscript and to think about the organization of a book that in the past was organized by different themes thematically. And I thought, well, we need to think not only of each person trying to organize the book in a different thematic way, but maybe there is a way of organizing the book as Pessoa was writing it chronologically. And after many years of working on those papers in the National Library in Lisbon, I proposed in 2010 a critical edition with a different organization of all the documents, suggesting, yes, we can read the book as it was written, almost as a diary. And if we read the book as a diary, we are going not only to read better some passages, it's not only about deciphering, it's also about understanding how the work was constructed, even if it was a work in progress, and why we can discover a new book if we read the book as it was written.
It's really interesting. I mean, there were the thing that I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it was basically like he left behind chunks of writings that were not organized in any cohesive way, but had like and they're both difficult to read and difficult to organize, correct?
Yeah, there is even a Book of Disquiet that was published in the UK, and you can sort the book in many different ways, and you can always read the book from the beginning to the end or in any random way. So there is no perfect way to read or to construct the book, but just as a suggestion, we can read the book as it was written. So it's many different pieces. It was not organized by Fernando Pessoa, and there is no definite organization, and there is no perfect way of putting all these pieces together. But we can understand what Pessoa was doing much better if we go through the chronological order.
It's interesting. There was someone, I think, emailed me or tweeted at us that there is a version that exists that's basically like note cards and other stuff in a box. That sounds amazing. That would be totally wild. It's sort of like, are you familiar with B.S. Johnson? And
no.
Oh, B.S. Johnson was a British author who passed away some years ago, but he was a sort of 60s, 70s experimental author. He wrote a lot of great books that New Directions has published, and one is called, I want to say it's The Unfortunates, but I'm not sure if that title's right. But it comes in a box, and it's there's one page, it's a series of bound little pamphlets that are the book itself. I think there's 32 of them, and there's one that's marked as the first one and one that's marked as the last one, and the rest are to be shuffled in between. And they're about him going to write about a soccer match and what happens in a soccer match, but also like his relationship to that town and the people that he'd been there years before. But it's got that same sort of like that hopscotch Pessoa-like quality of like things don't need to be read or things don't need to be read in like a linear order.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes in Latin American literature, I think of Rayuela, of Julio Cortázar.
Yeah.
Cortázar took 3-4 years to determine a certain order, but he could perfectly well not have set that order, and it could be us that could be trying to make sense of a certain set or order for Rayuela. So in the case of Pessoa, we have no definite order, and we are just playing, imagining which could be that ideal order.
So I know that you did the work to put it into the chronological order and structured it in this way, and it is significantly longer in terms of the number of pieces that are included than the previous versions. But I have a question. Is this your favorite version of how to read the book?
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, it's difficult to answer because obviously I did prepare the edition. I'm responsible for it. But the first time that I read the book in a very confused for me order, mixing the fragments of the early fragments with the late fragments, I felt a very strange sensation. I felt like, why I'm reading at the same time the romantic, the decadent, the modernist, the avant-garde, the late writings by someone that knows that he's going to die and that it's focusing himself in his city in Lisbon, and why all of this is mixed together. And now at least, let's say that I can understand much better a writer as Fernando Pessoa that at the beginning was trying to imitate Oscar Wilde, that was reading The Art of Lying, that was reading Amiel and his journaling team, that was a decadent, but that was also a symbolist. And that's one Fernando Pessoa that will never tell you that he's in Lisbon, even if it's raining all time in the Book of Disquiet. But there is a second Book of Disquiet because Pessoa stopped writing for 10 years. And when he wrote again under the plan of the Book of Disquiet and finding someone with the name of Bernardo Soares, he discovered Lisbon. And the most important poetic discovery of the book at a certain point, more or less 1928, is the city of Lisbon. And the city of Lisbon is not something that you can find at the beginning. It's something that Pessoa found in 1928, 1929. And then he understood this is not going to be so much a diary. This is going to be the description of Lisbon, trying to describe someone called Bernardo Soares. And Bernardo Soares and Lisbon are the wonderful, fantastic poetic discoveries of Pessoa, late discoveries in 1928, not at the beginning in 1913 when he began to write this wonderful book.
Right. So do you have a preference as to which sections you particularly like? Is it the second half that you prefer to the first half, or I know as a whole it's pretty interesting. It's similar to what we did with an earlier season. We covered Mercè Rodoreda, and we did all of her short stories, which we published in chronological order, and you could see like her development as a writer and her themes that get picked up and her way of like figuring something out. And then when we got to her novel, it's like, this is now a fully formed, crystallized, new sort of writer that's on a new plane. And it reminded me, I talked about this on our other podcast, the 3% podcast yesterday. But when I was reading this, there's like this moment that's curious to me about like how authors all of a sudden break out. And not terms of like sales, because I don't care about sales, but like in terms of like going from like one level to like a new level of being able to write, and how that happens to different authors at different periods. And with Pessoa, he's got these glimpses in this first half of it of like this great, amazing sort of almost this like self-referential and almost ironic and understanding like what he's doing. And then there's other ones where it's like, this is fine, but it's sort of like, you know, just more straightforward and doesn't have that thing, but you can feel him starting to break out. And I feel like the second half is where he's
exactly. So there are two books inside the book. There are two periods. One period you don't know where it's happening, when it's happening. There is no space, no time reference. And there is a second half that is very concrete, that is very clear about the city of Lisbon, that is very clear about someone called Bernardo Soares. And you have a very vague, decadent first period, and you have a very concrete, sharp second period. I like the both, but I think that the first one is more for adolescent. It's very difficult to read in terms of sentimental education. And the second one, it's much more mature. And the second one was going to receive a different title. So if Pessoa had published only the second part, it was going to be called Rua dos Douradores, the Douradores Street, this street where Bernardo Soares was supposed to be working. There is the second part is about Rua dos Douradores in an epic sense, and about the center of Lisbon and some tiny streets where people go to work in the middle, in the main center of Lisbon. The first half is about someone dreaming, we don't know where, and dreaming and lying in the sense that Oscar Wilde will understand imagination, in the sense Javier de Mestre will understand this journey, this voyage around his room.
Yeah.
And there is one that is more narcissistic and self-centered, and that one that is open to the universe in a complete different sense, of someone saying, Bernardo Soares, I can see the universe from my window, and here from Rua dos Douradores, I can see everything.
Right. So it's like that tethering is going to be a big change between the first half and the second half, I think.
Yes.
Jeronimo, do you know what happened in that 10-year, you said there's that 10-year gap where he kind of...
Exactly.
Do you know what happens in that 10-year gap? Do academics, or is there a paper trail that you can find of what's happening to him?
No, it's curious. We don't know that much, and Pessoa stopped writing. At least he was not writing that much in that period. There was the avant-gardes, let's say from 1914 in the case of Portugal, or 1913 to the end of the First World War in 1919. Then in 1920, Pessoa really stopped writing as much as he was writing before. He was publishing, but he was publishing what he wrote in the 1910s. And from 1910 to 1928, I think he was seeking new paths. He was not so experimental. He was not even, he didn't write anything about surrealism that was in 1927. He was very silent. He was going even to a magazine, a journal about economics, and he was producing dictionaries. He was trying to earn his life with translation, with different projects, but he was not writing that much poetry, and he abandoned the Book of Disquiet. He was not writing for Message, his only book. He was not writing much French poetry or English poetry. So for 10 years, I think that he was writing slowly, not that much, and he was trying to find new aesthetic paths. And I think that's what happened with the Book of Disquiet. There is the first decadent part, and there is a second book that it's something different, that it's, for example, that the real amazement of José Saramago in the year of the death of the Ricardo Reis is the second part of the book. And I think that's my opinion, that what Saramago tries to do in this book he published is to react to the reading of the Book of Disquiet, because the Book of Disquiet was published in Lisbon in 1982. Right. Saramago read the book in 84 or 83 as soon as it was published, and he was shocked because he understood, here you have Lisbon, and it has never been described before in Portuguese literature to a certain extent. And Saramago, I think he tried to write about Lisbon after reading Disquiet, because he felt, I'm going to lose Lisbon literary if I do not write something after this book. Pessoa is not only a poet, Pessoa is a great prose writer. This is almost a novel, and Saramago was trying to compete with Pessoa's Disquiet with his The Year of the Death of Ricardo Reis.
That's interesting. That's good. That's an interesting read. I read that book before I knew really who Pessoa was. Like, I knew of Pessoa, but I had not read any of the versions of the Book of Disquiet. And isn't there, I think in English there is like one of the Ricardo Reis or like some poetry from one of the Saramago heteronyms, or Pessoa heteronyms does exist in English, and we had it in the bookstore, but I don't remember reading it. And then I read the Saramago book and was like, I don't quite get this. Like, it's referring to this other important guy who didn't really exist. But which is a different question. Are you also, so you've got the Book of Disquiet that you've edited together, but are you working with any of the writings of the other heteronyms?
Yes. In fact, New Directions will publish next year Alberto Caeiro. I think in 2 years Ricardo Reis, and I think in 3 years Álvaro de Campos. So a certain complete set of Pessoa's main work will be available, at least in New Directions, in a kind of complete works of Caeiro, complete works of Reis, complete works of Campos. It's a project for the next 3 years.
That sounds like entirely too much work. I don't know about that.
Yeah.
I'll wait for an infograph or something, and I can just click. Oh, look at that! I got it. All right, I can talk about this at a cocktail party now. Done.
The LitHub list of 10 best Pessoa quotes.
Yeah, that'll work.
We were joking last week that you could take some of these and put them as Instagram poetry, and like if you didn't acknowledge that they were from Pessoa, people would be like, "This is amazing." It's the best thing I've ever read. Which is super fun. It really works for the first step, I think, more than any of the other.
No, and then you can construct many different books of aphorisms and maxims by Pessoa.
Oh, yeah.
The Book of Disquiet has many aphorisms because, I mean, Pessoa was reading Oscar Wilde.
Mm-hmm.
Wilde was a great aphorism writer, and Pessoa was trying to imitate Wilde in many things. And one of those was trying to write a small sentence, like maxims, and you can take from the book and from many other places, but especially from the Book of Disquiet, you can take out specific lines, and you can make a book only with certain lines of Disquiet.
Amazing. It is like, it's sort of pre-Olympian in a way, where it's got that kind of permutation, computational quality to it that you could just reorder over and over again. One more question before we maybe ask a couple of questions about the section itself. But did you work at all with the translation, or were you just totally away from that part?
No, I mean, I was partially involved, but not completely. I was especially trying to help Margaret Jewel Costa to decide between different options that she was sending me. And we were sometimes going again and again to the originals because, well, this Portuguese, the syntax of the Portuguese that Pessoa uses is very particular. It's a very peculiar Portuguese, so in English it's constantly difficult to translate. I think one of the most difficult books to translate by Pessoa is the Book of Disquiet. So even if Margaret Jewel Costa thought she was understanding what it was there, we were like, well, but it's really strange many times. Let's double check, triple check with the manuscripts. And what happened was that the manuscripts will confirm what the book that was published had. And we had to admit, okay, this is strange, but we have to find a way to translate this strangeness. And I think one of the difficult things about translating Disquiet is that you have to keep that strangeness, even if it's in a translation sometimes. Because Pessoa was really trying to do something special with the Portuguese language and with certain words, including the Sassossego, that at the beginning in English was translated as disquietude and now as disquiet. But the Sassossego was not a common word in Portuguese. Now it's almost like a technical word. And I think of the Sassossego as I think of a spleen. But a spleen became something technical. And now the Sassossego is the same thing. It was a word that was rediscovered by Pessoa, as he not only rediscovered words, but invented words. Heteronym, heteronymism, orthonym are words invented, almost invented by Pessoa, at least in the acception that he's using those words.
That's really cool too. That is true. Like thinking about the word disquiet only means this book to me, generally.
So it's very difficult to translate to French, to Italian, because you do not have that word, the Sassossego.
How many languages has this book been translated into?
I will guess that at least like 15 or 20, more or less.
That seems right to me. So
yeah, I like that part on page 53 where he says, I always felt the deep aversion for knowing how one should say things. The only thing I liked in grammar books were the exceptions and the pleonasms. And then a little bit later, an honest sentence should always have several meanings. And they have this discourse about, verbiage and I really like that playfulness, because I'm teaching a workshop right now with intermediate students and trying to really like hone down some rules. Like you have to do that. And here's like, I don't do any of that. Don't worry about it. That's all bullshit. Don't do any of that. Have fun. Like
break the rules. It was one of those. I used to have this theory that iPhones are ruining our lives, our writing lives, because they're ruining our lives in a lot of ways. But because you can't make neologisms anymore. It always autocorrects them. So you're like restricted, and frequently if you try and do things grammatically interesting or different, it'll just autocorrect it into something that's nonsense. So like I try to turn off like all those functions because I want to be able to say things that are not the way that Apple wants me to say things. Like fuck Apple.
No. That's a problem, and also orthography, because Pessoa had a very particular orthography, and he was not writing with modern Portuguese. So if you use any kind of technology that has autocorrection, Pessoa's Portuguese evades, disappears.
Yeah, it's like Ulysses. Ulysses is an impossible book. If you run that through like Word, it will just like be all red lines. It's cool. So just for everyone who's listening and paying attention, this is the section we're going over is pages 47 through 94 this week. It's the sections 40 through 81. Last week we tried to like sort of frame it into like some understanding of this character coming into existence, or like some way of like doing that. I don't know if that works for this time so well. I didn't go back through everything to try and make it make sense in that way. And I don't think it's supposed to. But I do have to say that when I hit section 52, this is the first time that I was like, this is the Pessoa that I particularly like. Which begins with like, I would like to set down a code of inertia for the leaders of modern societies. So this is my favorite line. Society would govern itself spontaneously if it did not contain people of sensitivity and intelligence. That, believe me, is the only obstacle. Primitive societies existed happily enough on more or less that basis. That's one of my favorite parts. It's just so. Oh, and then that next line. The trouble is that the expulsion of a society's leaders would result in their deaths because they do not know how to work. Or they might die of tedium because there is not enough room for stupidity among them. But what I am talking about is a cure for human happiness. This is a great section. I love that.
Yeah, and one of the things about Disquiet is that Pessoa will attack all of the ideals of the French Revolution. So, in a way, we are constructed by the ideals of the French Revolution.
True,
And
yeah.
if you go and look into the Disquiet, the Book of Disquiet, it can be a problem, at least for the sentimental education we had, even intellectual education, because it goes against, for example, the idea we have of humanity.
Yeah.
And so many of the ideals, or the main three ideals of the French Revolution, you can read the book and it's like a direct attack to those ideals. Or it seems at least.
That's interesting. That does make sense. That is an interesting way to frame it too. Trying to work that through in my mind.
Yeah. From truth to a handkerchief, nothing is possessible.
Related to what we said earlier too, there's that great 60 is like the most direct thing of it. Never read a book to the end and never read it straight through without jumping ahead. That is, are you familiar with Macedonio Fernandez?
Yes, I was working in the archives of Macedonio Fernandez in Buenos Aires some years ago, because part of my PhD dissertation was about Macedonio and Pessoa. So if you read the Museo de la Novela de la Eterna,
we published that.
Okay. So that's a wonderful book.
It is.
That will never begin, or that could be only that kind of Macedonio book that has many prefaces and no book at all. Or if you go to Macedonia's notebooks, you understand that that's a complete chaos, and that, well, you can try to make an order out of that chaos, but that Macedonia was not trying at all. And that you can jump from one page to any other page by Macedonia, or in this case by Pessoa, that left in those trunks a complete mess.
Yeah, and it is, and Macedonia had that same thing. They found all those poems in like sugar jars and crazy stuff afterwards. Yeah, I met his daughter or his niece that was helping with all that a few years ago. It was pretty interesting. But yeah, that book is spectacular, and it does have a very postmodern sort of idea that reading nonlinear creates your own path and gives you meaning to the book itself. So it's like taking that kind of choose your own adventure level, but much smarter and on a different way of like personal self creation through like where you flip to or what you end up reading in what order.
Yeah.
This is an interesting section. This wasn't of the sections of the book that we've read, this wasn't my absolute favorite, but there are a lot of lines that I marked on it, where I liked a lot of bits and pieces of this one, of these 40 pages. But I also, as I was going along, was like, man, I cannot wait to hit that second section. I know it's coming.
I don't think you like this one because it says don't masturbate and don't do opium. And
I was really upset about that.
Like, son of a bitch.
I put so many exclamation marks next to that. I was like, fuck you. I want opium and Jack in it. Like, this is no fun.
No stimulation for the self at all. Whatever.
Yeah. But one of the things I like about Disquiet and about the first half of Disquiet is that you get really upset. And it's a book that can get you very, very upset about certain affirmations. And I think that's a good thing. And also because Pessoa wrote in different parts about masturbation, and he was saying that in a sense, modern art is a form of masturbation. If we understand modern art as a way of dreaming, and dreaming it's something only inside your head.
There's that constant tension between his like, do nothing, do absolutely nothing, just be a dreamer, and yet never stop talking about that process, which is like, the sort of Zen koan-like aspect to Pessoa's attempt at finding a sort of larger self. I do love too the bits about God in here, because we did talk a little bit about the religious sort of overtones that came through in the first half in terms of the first section of the book when we talked last week about sort of the rhythms, the cadences, the sort of almost religious tones that come through. And then this has that great part on 50 of, is God merely perhaps a big child? Does not their entire universe seem like a game, a prank played by a naughty child, so unreal? I toss this idea up in the air for you, but seeing it from afar, I suddenly see how horrifying it is. What if it's true? Which those kind of turns of mind as he's writing is like what reminds me both of this being like a Tumblr blog, but also like what makes it fun, because you get to be on his plane of like, this, wait, no, that's no, oh, but maybe that's that's an idea. The world is a simulation.
And I think there is no clear idea of fate, or there is no clear idea of religion. So it's an undertone, but you cannot clearly say, and there is going to be, even at the end, not at the beginning, some esoteric or kind of esoteric pages, especially some pages written after Pessoa met Aleister Crowley in Lisbon in 1930.
Oh, really?
But at the, yeah.
Yeah.
But at the beginning, it's really a book where religion is difficult to be understood.
Yeah, we talked a little bit last time too about how this is very much has that feeling of cataclysm on the horizon, and World War I's just about to start, and you have that the death of God, the death of like humanity's things in there, because there's like this World War I is one of those weird periods where if you read a lot of people writing around the beginning of the war, they're all excited for it, as if like everyone just needed to get this out somehow, and like didn't realize that it would be horrifying. Like war they thought was like more like the 6-day war, the like, or not 6-day, but like the normal conventional ways of war. And so they're like, yes, we need to take care of the shit that's been building up inside of us for the past X number of years. This is going to be perfect. And then 4 years later, they're like, that was not what we wanted. It was wrong. That was a bad call. Like, I think there's even like Thomas Mann has stuff like that, where he's like, thank God the gears of war are finally churning. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah.
You have that sense in here too. The God stuff falling apart and everything being absurd. Yeah, the absurdity is another one that comes up a lot throughout this section as well. How absurd this seems, but then everything is absurd, and dreams are among the least absurd of things. You know who? This is something I need to talk to you about after we're done too, Brian. But have you ever heard of the author Anton Volodin?
No way.
Okay, and Anton Volodin's a contemporary French writer. He's written 42 books of like a proposed 49 book cycle under a series of heteronyms and or pseudonyms. I mean, they're essentially working like the Pessoa version, and they all interact with one another within this like grand literary universe. And one part of his, there's a lot of dreams, a lot of this sort of like same sort of dream, like not imagery, but dreams as like an importance, sort of in that David Lynch way of dreams being like more meaningful than dreams. And one of the things that's interesting is that Volodin claims that the most important part of his books aren't the words that are written on the page, but the dreams you dream the night after you finish reading it. And I've known multiple people who've read his books and been like, I've had the craziest experiences. And like this kind of provocation to like become a dreamer rather than a on action, on page, on realist is so interesting, as if that it has that, again, near Buddhist veil of like, there's something here. That's not the real part. The real part is the dreaming, but to accomplish the dreaming is almost impossible.
Yeah, that sounds like Pessoa. What can I say? That really sounds.
Another good one I had is art is an act of isolation. Every artist should seek to isolate other people to fill their souls with the desire to be alone. I just put Instagram. That one's an Instagram. That was an Instagram poem right there. Oh man, what was your take on this section, Brian?
I enjoyed this one. I'm enjoying it more as we're moving. I guess I'm kind of just giving myself into not trying to create some through line. You just kind of let the words wash over you. Take what you want from it, leave what you want from it, and just enjoy it that way. Just kind of floating in it. So I'm enjoying it more now that I'm not trying to. What is the overarching theme that's going to run through each section here of the treating them like maxims or aphorisms and just enjoying the language and the. Yeah, so I enjoyed it. I think I'm getting a little more used to how I should read Pessoa, or how I like to read Pessoa.
And it is like it is seeming more like I mean, this is one of those things, Jeronimo, that came up because the book is finalist for a prize for poetry, and we always like it's such a weird idea of like, it's not really poetry, but it's not really a novel. So it's in between. How I think we categorize it in the I've always categorized it as fiction, but I guess, you know, that's very broad.
Yeah, it's very, very broad. It's complicated because it's a kind of diary, but it's also very poetic. Pessoa said at a certain point, I'm trying to write the best prose written in Portuguese, but to write that great prose, I have to think not only about Padre Antonio Vieira and 17th, 18th century and this Jesuitic prose, but I have to think about Paul Verlaine, and it has to be a mixture of Padre Antonio Vieira and Paul Verlaine. And if I can do that, if I can write a great prose with poetical touches, that's the book that I want. And obviously, I mean, he's not talking, and I don't know why he is not talking and he's forgetting about Baudelaire, but Baudelaire prose poems, I think, are directly related to the Book of Disquiet. So he was reading Amiel, and he was reading diaries, he was reading Oscar Wilde, and he was trying to find a certain kind of prose. But he was reading the Decadents, the Symbolists, and he was reading classical authors. So he was trying to do something between the musical and Verlaine and the great prose of someone of the 17th century of a certain golden age. And that's the book. It's a very weird mixture of golden age and decadent prose with poetry.
Right. That's interesting. You, Brian, you brought this up last week, and you're curious if there were other like Portuguese writers at the time that he was like in conversation with, too. But it sounds like it was more. Were there some Portuguese as well? Because a lot of the French writers clearly had an influence.
Yeah, very few. I mean, he was in contact, especially with Mário de Sá Carneiro, that committed suicide in 1916 in Paris, and that was very, very influenced by French literature.
Okay.
So Pessoa, and Pessoa was even trying to imitate at a certain point Mário de Sá Carneiro, and he was reading very much José de Almada Negreiros, a painter, writer, and poet also of his generation. And he was reading, even if he was not confessing, he was reading Essa de Queiroz and 19th century authors. And Essa de Queiroz also invented a sort of heteronym with Fradique Mendes and the epistolary of Fradique Mendes.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
There are some Portuguese authors, but Pessoa was not really finding so much in Portuguese literature. He was interested about futurism in Italy and Paris. He was thinking about imagism in London and what Ezra Pound was doing. He was very interested in Whitman. He was reading Baudelaire, and he was influenced by French literature. And at least the first part of the book, it's very much influenced by French literature and by Oscar Wilde.
That's interesting. So it's curious in a way. It's like it seems to me like now that Portuguese literature couldn't be what it is today without Pessoa. The Pessoa sort of altered things greatly, and yet Pessoa's writing wasn't available to people, like you say, until 1982. Like that's a crazy thing, that there was a track of Portuguese writing that was going along, and then all of a sudden this thing happens that was like almost like a time bomb, because it was like from the past, and then all of a sudden everyone's like, oh shit, like we can do all these different things and all this stuff can happen. Like I don't. Maybe you could just for our audience and for ourselves, but like which Portuguese authors that are writing nowadays would you say are like big, that Pessoa has had a huge influence on?
Yeah, I mean, I think in most of them, José Saramago, the only Nobel Prize of the Portuguese language, was clearly influenced by Fernando Pessoa, and he also claimed the influence, I don't know, of Jorge Luis Borges and other writers. So José Saramago will be the first, and he was clearly influenced by Pessoa. Then if you go and see Portuguese poetry, even if it's Sofia de Mello Breiner Anderson, if it's Eugenio de Andrade, if it's any Portuguese poet of the 20th century was influenced by Pessoa. I also think it's difficult to determine. Antonio Lobo Antunes,
That's
the
what I was
great
thinking.
prose writer that is still alive, that received the Guadalajara Prize for his career, that it's now going to be published in La Pleiad. Lobo Antunes tries to dismiss Pessoa constantly, but he read Pessoa perfectly well, and he has a difficult relation with Pessoa, but he is a very good reader of Fernando Pessoa. So, and in Brazil, Brazilian writers, they try to say that Pessoa, in a way, was born in Brazil, and they claim, yeah, it's incredible. If you go to Brazil, Pessoa is Brazilian. And he is Brazilian because he is inside of Brazilian literature as much as he is inside Portuguese literature, and even some literature written in Mozambique, in Angola, in Cape Verde. Pessoa is also present in Cape Verdean literature.
Huh.
Yeah.
We have a lot of Americans listening. Is there a way you can shoehorn Jonathan Franzen into this conversation?
Pessoa also liked birds.
Yeah, there you go.
Darn.
No, it's interesting in that when you're talking about some of his influences or who he's in contact with, it made me think of on page 54 when they mentioned suicide.
Yes.
It was it's at the top. It was a part I marked. Why did he commit suicide? Wait, I don't know yet. He was trying to discover and establish a way of completing sentences without appearing to do so. He used to tell me he was looking for the microbe of signification. And of course, he committed suicide because one day he understood the huge responsibility he'd taken on. The importance of the problem drove him mad. A revolver. Is that writer you were talking about that killed himself in Spain or in Paris?
Yeah, I mean, it could perfectly be, because Pessoa even wrote a poem where he says to Mario de Sá Carneiro, well, if you're going to commit suicide, why don't you stop talking about that and you simply go and commit suicide? And Pessoa himself was thinking many times about suicide, but he did not commit suicide, but he made many of his fictitious authors and heteronyms to commit suicide by himself.
Okay.
So thematically, suicide is everywhere in Pessoa's work. And when he makes because in Disquiet you also have some dialogues, and this dialogue, it's about suicide at the end.
Yeah.
And I think he is indirectly in conversation with Mario Sá Carneiro, and this could perfectly be a page that he was sending to Paris, a copy he was sending to Paris to receive backup from Sá Carneiro.
Wow, very interesting. Very interesting.
I don't remember where I read this, but wasn't there one of his, because his heteronyms used to interact a lot, and one of the heteronyms admitted being jealous of Pessoa's girlfriend, which led to them breaking up.
Yeah.
that's wonderful. That's
yeah.
I think Pessoa would have been a total troll if he was a contemporary writer.
Yeah, but you see, there you have something very special and difficult about Disquiet. What's the idea of love and what is love according to the book? And I think that Pessoa has a very difficult relationship with love, with sex, with the body, and that you can feel that especially in the first part, where it seems that it's not about real relationships, but only dream relationships, and where the body is absent.
Like the last section that we read, 81, advice to an unhappily married woman, or to unhappily married women, has a whole thing about being a coquette, reveling in every kind of vice without betraying your husband with so much as a look. Think how pleasurable that would be if you could achieve it. Be a coquette inside. Betray your husband from inside. Betray him when you embrace him. And the kisses you give him while thinking of someone else. Oh, superior women, curious cerebral followers, therein lies true pleasure. Like that sort of internalized, and there's so many parts of like, I spent so many hours thinking of you as that dream woman. That's like non-existent.
And that fragment in particular was banned from the first edition in 1982. So this is a fragment that was rescued some years ago, but that was not published at the beginning.
Wow. 1982 seems like way too late in the game to be banning things like that. Like, that feels like a 1950s sort of thing.
Yeah,
1982 had AIDS and cocaine. Like, there's lots of shit going down.
Yeah.
I don't have anything else to add, except I do want to read my favorite line, which is this is the Chad giving advice to himself line.
Okay.
Usually I have the depression ones or like the real bleak shit. This time it's opposite. It's on 71, section 62. The truly wise man is the man who lets external events trouble him as little as possible. To do this, he needs to armor himself by surrounding himself with realities that are closer to him than those events, and through which the events reach him, change so into accord with those realities. Just like setting up an intellectual buffer, a filter bubble of sorts.
Yeah, and there is something also special about traveling, because he is imagining that traveling has not to be physical travel, but simply imagine the best way to travel and dreaming. So this about the external events is like a protection.
Yeah.
I was trying to protect him very, very much. And Pessoa was someone that did not leave Lisbon, the city of Lisbon. I mean, he came back from South Africa in 1905, and until 1935 that he died, he was all of his time in Lisbon. He went to 1 or 2 cities in Portugal. Maybe he never went to Oporto in the north, for example, to Port, but I think that he was between Lisbon, Évora, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 times in the south, and we don't know very well when he went to Évora, when he went to the south, but he was most of his time in Lisbon, and some part of Lisbon he will not.
Dropped out there.
So yeah, it's a very, very sedentary kind of writer.
That's interesting. He always I think it's because of my imagination related to this place, but his writing reminds me of Sintra.
Yeah.
Where it's like unreal and like at the same time very, very much real. Did you have a favorite line, Brian?
I had several. I'll pick one that's a little of a downer for you, since you didn't pick a downer one.
There you go.
This would be a great one for Instagram posts and for Twitter. It's on page 82.
Which section is it?
It's section 70.
Okay. Someone just mentioned that we should mention that because the UK edition is different page numbers.
Okay. Yeah, it's 70. The section 70. I recognize today that I failed. The only thing that astonished me sometime is that I did not foresee that I would fail. Was there anything in me that promised victory?
Yeah, that's wonderful.
That's going to be my new Twitter description. I'm getting rid of goodbye, Andrew Miller. I'm replacing you with my failed this.
Why am I surprised that I failed? There is nothing in my constitution that said I would be successful. I've been looking at this all wrong.
That is so good.
Yeah, and at a certain point of the second half of the book, Pessoa says, and this book is a failure. And this is one of my biggest and most wonderful and fantastic failures. So the book itself, it's a failure. And the most famous, celebrated poem by Pessoa, The Tobacco Shop, is about failure.
Well, I think you failed miserably at putting this thing together. So excellent work. All your hard work.
Do you have a line that you want to quote as like your favorite from this little 40-page section?
Well, I was mentioning rain, and I was also mentioning that it's raining all the time because, for example, I was rereading the Oscar Wilde essay on the decay of life, and he was saying, well, yes, there is a lot of fog in London, but when you write about fog, it's completely an imaginary fog.
Oh.
One of the things that I do not like very much about Saramago, The Death of Ricardo Rey, is that it's raining all the time. It's 1936 and it's raining all the time. But Saramago says, you know, I went to the National Library, I read many newspapers, and the newspaper said that in 1936 it was raining all the time. So in my novel, it's raining all the time because it was raining at the time. I think that for Pessoa, it was very clear that it was not about a real rain, but that, well, there is many fog in Lisbon and there is in London, and that he was going to write about a place where it's raining most of the time. And I like many of those pages about raining and about the atmosphere. So maybe in page 63, section 55, that because some sections have titles and some sections do not have titles.
Right.
This says landscape in the rain. It rains and rains. My soul grows damp just listening to it. So much rain, my flesh turns liquid and watery around my consciousness of it. So there is something about the atmosphere outside, the atmosphere inside, and he's trying to do a portrait of someone through the atmosphere that there is outside. And then in the second half, it's like, okay, I don't know if it's inside or outside. I don't know if it's objective or subjective. Everything, it's going to mix together. There is going to be this intersection. And we, at a certain point, we don't know if people are alive or dead, if it's raining outside or inside of his mind.
There is, like, I know that the two sections are sort of written by different heteronyms to some degree, and or in the second case, like a semi-heteronym. But it does seem like, too, there is like an advancement of philosophy and almost like physics influence that goes on in here, too, of like moving from that romantic era and the ideas that went along with that into something where it is both internal and external are mingled, and there's no longer the separation. And that's a very like early 20th century sort of development of thought and how we think about what reality is or what the world is. And it does seem to be reflected in here. And that's going to be very curious as we go on with this too. So.
Yeah, I completely agree. And there is something also about avant-garde, because Pessoa was in 1913-14, he created something called Paulism. Then he created something called intersectionism, and then he created sensationism. And it was in the lab of 2-3 years, and he was writing the Book of Disquiet, and he was inventing these different movements. So we can also read the first half of the Book of Disquiet, trying to understand what Pessoa wrote about Paulism, intersectionism, and sensationism.
Interesting, and very cool. Well, thank you very much for coming on here and giving us so much great insight into the book and how it's put together and how to read it. This is incredibly helpful for both me, Brian, and for anyone who's listening. Just as a reminder, next week, we will be going over pages 95 through 141, which are sections 82 through 130. As always, you should go on iTunes and rate and review us, share the podcast with all your friends. It'll be on iTunes on Thursday mornings like usual, and on Wednesday mornings, generally, we have the live YouTube. So if you want to come in and ask questions, you can ask questions in the forum. For anyone who is watching on YouTube, this is our special open letter t-shirt. All your books belong to us, which is a play off of the famous like mistranslation in a video game, name of which I can't remember. But it is available on our website for $20 through openletterbooks.org. Also, you can follow me on Facebook or on Twitter at ChadWPost, and Open Letter is at open_letter. Brian, they can find you on there?
Yeah, it's just my name, Brian Wood _.
And
Jeronimo, are you on Twitter? Where can people find what you do?
No, I'm not at this moment, but I might be back. No, you will not find me in Twitter.
Good.
In many other places is in the net.
Well, people can watch for more volumes that you edit.
Yes.
More Pessoa volumes over the next 3 years. Also, one other thing that I mentioned at the beginning was a game. We made a joke about making a 2-month review bingo. Well, that is going to be a reality. By the time that the next episode comes out, there are going to be playing cards, bingo playing cards, 10 different varieties of them. And you'll be able to either download it or get one in the mail. And whoever is listening to this and finds a bingo of random things that we say or typically do, such as mentioning baseball or having a sports digression or wearing merchandise, If you mark those down and send a photo of your bingo card with the word bingo in the subject line to chad.post@rochester.edu, the first person to do that each episode will receive a special code to get 30% off of anything they want from Open Letters. So except for subscriptions, those can't be included, but anything else. So that'll be starting up soon. In the meantime, there's, keep reading Pessoa and stay semi-depressed and making internet poetry.
Well,
yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was super fun.
Wonderful having you.